The Beyond Burger, I call the Big Yawn Burger. And it's made from pea protein. It's organic pea protein. So you don't have all of the problems with the soy protein. But it's processed at very high temperatures, which is bound to warp and distort the proteins. They have a lot of MSG in them. Now, it's not labeled as MSG, of course, but they add flavorings that have the same effect as MSG, and preservatives and colorings. And there is some soy in these burgers in the form of something called soy heme protein. So they've figured out how to genetically modify soy to make this heme protein, which is like blood. And so this is what gives these burgers their bloody look and makes them kind of resemble meat. Folks, this is processed food. This is about as processed as you can get with all of the additives of processed food. And this is being touted as a healthy alternative to a nice beef burger.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey everybody, I'm your host Hilda Labrada Gore. This is episode 213 and our guest is Fallon Morell. Sally is the head of the Weston A. Price Foundation. She is a defender of real food and an advocate for ancestral wisdom for optimal health. Today she tackles a topic that we've wanted to dig into for a while, the importance of including animal products in our diet. We say yes to meat here at the Weston Price Foundation, absolutely. And Sally addresses several controversial topics around the subject, including the new movie that is out that is pro-vegan, The Game Changers, the Impossible and Beyond burgers, and what these are actually made of. And I'm telling you, this part of the conversation may actually turn your stomach. And why even our mitochondria need animal fats to function properly. She wraps it all up with a discussion about why microwaves are not best for cooking. So yeah, you could say Sally's not afraid of a little controversy when it comes to safeguarding our health. And truthfully, I'm thankful. Before we get into the conversation, a quick shout out to our sponsors. Ancestral Supplements with grass-fed colostrum. Colostrum is mother's first milk, fundamental nourishment that provides all the essentials to thrive as a healthy animal in nature. It is loaded with immune and growth factors and protective proteins. Go to ancestralsupplements.com and order yours today. You'll find a range of products made from New Zealand-sourced nose-to-tail organ meats, bone marrow, and colostrum in simple, convenient gelatin capsules. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. And you simply must join us at the Wise Traditions Conference coming up November 15th to the 17th, just north of Dallas, Texas. Make plans to attend. It's a gathering that nourishes in every way. The Wise Traditions Conference is where ancestral wisdom meets modern science. Register today at wisetraditions.org and use the coupon code WTPodcast for $20 off at checkout. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Sally.
Thank you, Hilda. It's great to be back with you again.
I'm excited about today's topic, this overview of the Fall Journal that really seemed to have a lot of information about how important animal products are in our diet.
Yes, let's call this Yes to Meat. And of course, by meat, we mean all animal products. And by animal products, we mean healthily raised animal products.
Absolutely, the whole gamut. So let's start with your caustic commentary, which is always a fun column to begin with. You said that this one man is promoting this really strange plant-based diet. Can you tell us more?
Okay, so this is a guy named Gideon Eschel, and he claims that replacing meat with plant-based alternatives in American diets would minimize cropland use and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so it's the same thing we're hearing over and over. And he is recommending, well, he came up with a list of foods that have the least environmental impact. And so here's the list: soy, green pepper, squash, buckwheat, and asparagus. So this is the diet that he is recommending that we eat. He said this will satisfy all the nutrient requirements and match the protein profile of meat, and then cut down on our greenhouse gases and make us nice little environmental bunnies here. So, so he said, but there might be a problem with somebody who's told they have to eat a diet made of soy, green pepper, squash, buckwheat, and asparagus. He admits that might be quite a problem, convincing people that those are the only things that they should eat. And he also brings up the pesky problem of certain nutrients that will be deficient, such as zinc and iron and all those things. That's okay. They might not live quite as long, but it would still be okay.
I get the feeling he's not going to have that many little bunnies following him around.
That's right. The other caustic commentary was based on some newspaper clippings one of our members sent us about a family in Kansas City. There were 3 family members who were great athletes, and they had all been accepted on athletic scholarships to Kansas City universities. And one was a basketball player, one was a runner. I think 2 were basketball players. And there were a lot of articles about this wonderful athletic family and how they followed a vegetarian or vegan diet. And they actually had a personal chef come and cook for them. Well, none of these kids ever made it to sports fame. They were just plagued with injuries and spent a lot of time of the year out, and none of them went on to sports greatness.
And this is not surprising to you because you understand the need for animal products to maintain our health and avoid injury, right?
Yes, and especially, one of our favorite animal products is bone broth, and all of these injuries were with tendons and joints, and that's exactly what you'd expect.
Wow, that's so sad.
Yeah, and people are being drawn in and convinced by this propaganda for plant-based diets. And people promoting these plant-based diets have a lot to answer for because they're deceiving people.
Well, I will tell you this, that new movie that came out, The Game Changers, in it, the very people they've interviewed to promote plant-based diets aren't necessarily vegetarian or vegan.
Right, and they're using other people's words and using people's faces and so forth to promote this diet. And as I've said before, there is so much more money to be made on plant-based foods than on animal-based foods. That's the impetus for this. It has nothing to do with the environment or making you more spiritual or anything else, but they'll use that propaganda to get people to eat more plant-based foods. And that's what we're seeing now with even the word plant-based diet. I'm sure they hired a big marketing firm and said, how can we sell this garbage to more people? Because vegetarians isn't a very complimentary term these days. And so they came up with this plant-based diet idea. And the idea is that to help the planet, well, maybe once a week, you'll eat one of these awful burgers or whatever. And it's just to increase sales.
They don't have our health in mind at all. Well, let's talk a little bit about cooking, Sally. I think that's one of the articles that's in this latest journal.
Yes, this is an article I wanted to write for a long time. It's called Why We Cook. And I start off by talking about this man who got shot in the stomach, and this is in the 1800s. He was out in the backwoods of New York, and it just so happened that there was a doctor there who was very interested in the subject of digestion. And this wound healed so he could look into the man's stomach.
I've heard of this story before. Okay.
And what he would do was put different things on a thread and put them down his windpipe and then observe what happened in the stomach. And it sounds pretty gruesome, but we actually learned a lot about digestion from that. And he wrote a book and described all his findings. So he described hydrochloric acid, how as soon as food comes into the stomach, these little glands start to secrete hydrochloric acid. Well, one of the main things that he determined was foods that have been cooked digest much quicker than foods that are raw. And foods that are cooked and chopped up fine digest even faster because there's a lot of surface area. So he came to the conclusion that it was important to cook the foods so that they would be digested more quickly.
So interesting because there's still that push to eat raw. I hear about raw diets all the time, and this is a little something that weighs in against that.
Yeah, all raw diets. Now, of course, we've always said your animal foods should be both raw and cooked. And I do quite a summary in this article of which things should be cooked and which things should be raw. And if we're eating some raw animal food, it should be, as he says, finely chopped. And so the steak tartare, the carpaccio, all these raw meat dishes usually are cut up really fine. You're not chewing on a great big chunk of meat like a dog would. You are chopping it up very fine, so there's a lot of surface area for the digestive juices. And the same with the cooking. For example, he put a piece of raw salt pork down the throat and watched, and then cooked salt pork. And the cooked salt pork digested much quicker and left the stomach completely digested.
Oh my gosh, I'm really eager to read this article now.
Yeah. One of the things he also noticed when this guy got mad, the guy with the hole in his stomach, and they were always,
I don't blame him, by the way.
I don't either. They were always arguing. They always had these fights. When he got mad, his stomach contracted into this tight, like your fist clenching up, and nothing happened when you put food down. Well, the food couldn't even get in there. And it kind of shows us what we've always known, that when you're upset and angry, you don't digest your food at all. So.
Right. Like some people say, oh, I'm sick to my stomach. And literally, these things that are happening, our emotions affect our digestion.
Right. And the stomach just closes up and tightens up because it's a muscle. Same when we're in fight or flight mode. Like if you're, really anxious about something, if you are having to do an athletic contest, something like that, or running away from somebody in danger, your body cannot digest things at that time. And that's why it's so important to learn to relax and, enjoy our food, enjoy people's company when we're eating.
And this is also a case, in light of what you've been saying, it's also important to chew thoroughly, right? I have friends who are big chewing proponents, and I guess they might have learned some of this from this study with this man. I don't know.
Well, yes, if it's a great big chunk of food, you definitely need to chew it. But some things we can kind of pre-chew by cutting them up really fine. By the way, when it came to vegetables, he said raw foods such as raw potato leave the stomach undigested. So there's no pre-digestion. It has to all be done by the small intestine then. So again, like something like potato, you want to mash it or cut it up fine and chew it. So there's lots of surface area for those digestive juices.
Wow, that's fascinating. Let's go on to the article about the mitochondria. I'm a big fan of the mitochondria ever since I learned more about them. These are like the little engines in our cells, right, that keep things running.
That's right. This is a big subject today. We hear a lot about mitochondria disease. And the mitochondria are something that we can see now a lot better with better microscopes. And they are the motors in our cells, and they generate the energy for us. And so you want your mitochondria to work. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I discovered writing my book, Nourishing Fats, was that the mitochondria have a membrane around them, just like the cells have a membrane around them. And those mitochondria, the cells have to be 50% saturated, those membranes, for your mitochondria to even work and for you to produce energy.
And saturated with what, Sally?
Saturated fats.
Okay.
So, saturated fatty acids. Yeah.
So just like we say the brain needs animal fats, our mitochondria do as well.
Yes, absolutely. There's a nice sidebar here with a list of the things that will interfere with our mitochondrial function. And I don't think it's going to surprise anyone. The list is antibiotics, big warning there, fructose, glyphosate, interferes with mitochondria function, because you know what? These mitochondria are like little bacteria inside our cells, and the glyphosate kills bacteria.
But wait, let's go back to fructose for a second. Are you saying the sugars found in fruits can interfere with the function of our mitochondria?
Well, the fructose, which is free fructose, certainly does. And I would say if you overdo on fruits or fruit juices or anything with a lot of fructose in it, you're going to have a problem. Cell phones and also statin drugs. Isn't that interesting? The statin drugs will mess up your mitochondria. So you'll have less energy if you're on a statin drug.
I think I told you this before, but I have a friend literally who was 35 years old and was like, oh, I'm losing my memory. I guess it was all the drugs I experimented with when I was in my 20s. But he was on statins. And I think the statins were making him forgetful and making him feel like an old man.
Yes, they do. They interfere with memory.
Who wrote this article on mitochondria?
This article is by Wayne Feaster, who's an osteopath, who's been a member for many, many years, written other articles for our journal, and has been a chapter leader for a long time.
And what was he trying to get across primarily in this article?
Well, just provide us information about the mitochondria, because we're hearing so much about it, and also to emphasize the importance of animal foods in the function of our mitochondria. And things like L-carnitine, which is found in animal protein, cod liver oil, these kinds of things that we get from animal foods that we need for healthy mitochondria.
I wonder how cell phones interfere with our mitochondrial function. Do you have an idea? What does he say about that?
Well, remember, when you're getting down so small as your mitochondria, everything works by electrical charge and very subtle vibrations. So you're getting down to the area where it's more energy than matter. And so, yes, you can imagine that these strong electromagnetic fields are going to interfere with that.
Some journal a while back, I remember seeing images of how our blood clumps together and is affected by the cell phones. Like there was just a little study of the blood.
Right. So what happens is the cells lose their electrical charge, so to speak, and they start to clump together. This is what happens in cancer also. The real question in cancer is what makes the cells clump together and how can we get them not to clump. And the cell needs a kind of halo of electrical charge, which is maintained by the mitochondria and by the actual water in the cells, because the water needs to be highly structured, and then the sodium-potassium difference and so forth. That all creates this really nice halo around the red blood cells or any cell in your body and keeps that separation from the other cells. So something breaks down in the red blood cell clumping or in cancer to make the cells stick together. That's really where we should be looking, and that's what Tom Cowan talks about in his new book on cancer.
Yes, we hope to have him on the podcast talking about that book.
Oh, good. And he's going to be at the conference also.
Well, speaking of the effects of energy around us, let's touch on the ultrasound article. What is it saying about the dangers of that?
Well, it's about prenatal ultrasound. It says not so sound after all. And again, you are exposing the developing fetus, the delicate, fragile developing fetus, to very strong electromagnetic fields with this ultrasound. And for a long time, we didn't know what the effects were, but now it's starting to come out. We're especially seeing speech disorders in children who've been exposed to the ultrasound and problems with genital development, because they're often focusing this on the fetus's genitals so that parents can know what sex the baby is.
I was going to ask you, why is so much prenatal ultrasound conducted anyway?
Yeah, why is it carried out? Well, this is what the doctors do when you're pregnant and you go in for, prenatal care, as they call it. This is just common procedure now. And unless you know better and to say, no, I don't want this, they'll just do it. They'll sign you up for your ultrasound. And they say they're looking for birth defects or whatever. Although most of the birth defects today you can find with a blood test.
It seems like people want to get the little ultrasound images and share them on Facebook.
Yeah,
we're pregnant.
Can't you wait a few months to find out what sex the child is? I mean, that's the old-fashioned way. The other thing that people don't realize is the prenatal monitor that they use to listen to the baby's heart. That is ultrasound, right there next to the baby. It's not as strong as the big ultrasound machine, but it definitely should not be used. So when you're pregnant and you go to the doctor, you don't want an ultrasound, and you want them to use a stethoscope and not the new heart monitor that they use.
This is a good word of warning, because I know a lot of our listeners are in that childbearing age, so it's really important for them to know this information. Thank you. I'm really eager to dig into this next article about fake meat. Talk to us about these fake burgers that are coming out.
Well, this is really what's captured the headlines these days, especially in the financial newspapers like the Wall Street Journal, is these fake burgers. So we have the Beyond Meat Burger. We have the Impossible Burger. And not yet introduced, but coming soon, are the lab meat burgers. So I went through each one to talk about what's in them. Starting with the lab meat burgers, this is so gruesome. They basically start with a cell of meat, and they feed that cell, and the cell keeps multiplying, and it's going to make this fake meat. Well, the question is, what are they feeding these meat cells? And one thing the meat cells have to have is something called bovine fetal serum. And the bovine fetal serum is made by when they go to butcher an old dairy cow, because most of our hamburger comes from old dairy cows. And a lot of them will be pregnant. They pull out the fetus, which may be almost ready to be born, and they have this process where they remove the blood from the fetus while it's still alive. And it takes about 10 minutes, and they drain the fetus of the blood. And from this blood, they make the bovine fetal serum to feed the meat cells. So this is not a process that avoids the suffering of animals, I can tell you. It's gruesome. It's so awful. And there must be 20 or 30 universities with grant money to develop this. And by the way, you also need to add antibiotics, antifungals, all kinds of things to this culture to keep it from getting moss on it or whatever. And lab meat is not the way, and I don't think it will ever even be introduced into the food supply.
And yet people think it's a better choice, it's more ethical, but it doesn't quite sound like that.
No, this is not ethical, and that's bound to get out in the internet. So I just don't think that there's a future for lab meat burgers. It's just a lot of wasted money.
So that's the lab meat. Talk to us about the other two, Impossible Burger and Beyond Burger.
Okay, so the Beyond Burger, I call the Big Yawn Burger. And it's made from pea protein. It's organic pea protein. So you don't have all of the problems with the soy protein. But it's processed at very high temperatures, which is bound to warp and distort the proteins. They have a lot of MSG in them. Now, it's not labeled as MSG, of course, but they add flavorings that have the same effect as MSG, and preservatives, and colorings. And there is some soy in these burgers in the form of something called soy heme protein. So they've figured out how to genetically modify soy to make this heme protein, which is like blood. And so this is what gives these burgers their bloody look and makes them kind of resemble meat. Folks, this is processed food. This is about as processed as you can get with all of the additives of processed food. And this is being touted as a healthy alternative to a nice beef burger. And when you eat a beef burger, you're eating beef. You know exactly what you're getting. When you're eating one of these Big Yawn burgers, you're getting all kinds of additives and stuff, possibly stuff that's not even labeled.
Coming up, Sally speaks directly to those who are actually avoiding animal products because of concern for animal welfare or for the environment.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Ancestral Supplements. Grass-fed colostrum by Ancestral Supplements. There are many ancestral records of praise given for colostrum throughout history. For thousands of years, Ayurvedic practitioners have used colostrum for its healing benefits. And in India, cows are still considered sacred animals. Hieroglyphic texts show that colostrum was used by the ancient Egyptians as well. Every mammal's birthright is to receive colostrum as our first food. Colostrum is mother's first milk, the fundamental nourishment that provides all the essentials to thrive as a healthy animal in nature. It is loaded with immune and growth factors and protective proteins. It is not only essential to mammals in the wild, but it helps us to build and maintain a robust immune system, and it supports gut growth and repair. So visit ancestralsupplements.com to see what they can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. And please join us for our Wise Traditions Conference this November, the 15th to the 17th, just north of Dallas, Texas. It's a gathering that nourishes in every way. You will get to meet speakers like Fallon Morell, Tom Cowan, David Diamond, and Jerry Tennant. These are experts in the field of science and nutrition. So join us. The Wise Traditions Conference is where ancestral wisdom meets modern science. Register at wisetraditions.org and remember that podcast listeners get a special code, WT Podcast, for $20 off registration. Thanks and hope to see you there. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. But what would you say to the person who says, you know what, I don't care about my own health actually, so I will eat all these chemicals because that's certainly better than how they're treating the animals? What would you say to that?
Well, I would say to that person, you are a living being and your number one responsibility is for you to be healthy so you can make this world a better place. And to buy pasture-raised meat that's raised in a way that actually improves the environment.
And also, all of these processed chemicals have to come from somewhere as well. In other words, isn't that a cost to the environment as well?
Exactly. They come from corn and soybeans. A lot of them come from China. Folks, this is not sustainable agriculture. This is not agriculture that's helping the planet at all. It's agriculture that involves poisoning the earth. And frankly, I'm much more concerned about the poisons we put in our earth than in, methane and all the greenhouse gases, because we've always had greenhouse gases.
And then the last one is the Impossible Burger.
Yes.
And what is the makeup of that one?
Okay, I call the Impossible Burgers soy disgusting because they are made from soybeans, genetically modified soybeans. The president came right out and said, we have decided that this is the most sustainable thing that we can use is genetically modified soybeans. So again, this is a highly toxic plant. Soy is toxic in its own right, and then it's sprayed with the Roundup, and then it's processed to create even more toxins. And then a lot of flavorings have to be added to cover up the bitter taste of the soy. Again, this is imitation food. It's cheap processed food, and it's being marketed in a very clever way to make you think, well, I'll just do my little bit for the planet.
And the truth is, this marketing is quite successful because not only in university campuses, but I think at elementary schools, they're starting to promote these variations on meat, which actually aren't meat at all.
Right. And so their goal is to get it into the schools, into the institutions. And again, I just can't stress enough, it's just not real food. It's cheap, processed imitation food. And it's just being promoted with a lot of hype and glitz. I highly suspect that these companies are actually doing well. I think it gets into the markets and people don't buy it, or they eat it once and they can't stand it, or they eat it once and they get a headache. And I think that the investors in these companies are going to lose their shirts.
And what do you think is going to happen to the people who are actually eating all this food, Sally? What do you think they're going to be missing, or how might they be impacted by these pseudo foods?
Well, the soy in particular, we actually know what happens when you eat a lot of soy because there was an experiment done on the Illinois prisoners between 2003 and the beginning of 2019 where they only got soy. They only got the equivalent of the Impossible Burger, cheap soy protein made into nuggets and patties and things. And no meat. They got no meat. Well, these men developed terrible digestive problems. I mean, terrible, awful digestive problems. Many of them developed severe thyroid problems to the extent that they could never work again. And, of course, there were the endocrine disrupting properties of the soy. They grew breasts. A lot of the prisoners grew breasts. And they called it chemical castration. By the way, when they fed this to the women, and the women prisoners, it only went on for about 6 months because the women stopped menstruating and they went on a hunger strike. And the doctors went out there and said, oh, yes, well, we can see this is true, so we won't serve the soy to the women. But the men got it for like 19 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
But that's changed now, right?
Yes, we feel that we were successful in helping bring about this victory starting January 1st of this year. No more soy to the men, so they're getting meat again. And this is not a gourmet diet by any means. Generally what they get are these patties, which are part meat and part byproducts. Byproducts means organ meats. So they don't like this very much, but actually these men are getting a very good diet, very nutrient-dense diet, because they get organ meats every day in their patties.
Isn't that funny? And then the people spending, hand over fist eating these fake foods are getting less than what they're paying for.
Yes, exactly. What we need to put our money into is, I always say, how to make offal taste good, learning to put the livers and the organ meats into our hot dogs and sausage and everything so that people are getting these organ meats every day.
Let's touch on one more article from the journal. This one is about microwaves. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I've been wanting this article for a long, long time because I've gotten a lot of pushback about our position not to use the microwave oven. And this was written by Miranda Teller, who does this wonderful column called Reading Between the Lines. And I'd had a big file of articles on the microwave I've been keeping for 25 years. So I sent that to her, and she's put this wonderful article together. And basically, we know now that the microwave really lowers the amount of vitamins and minerals in the food and pretty much destroys the proteins in the food. So when you eat microwave food, your body is saying, wait a minute, this is a foreign protein. I got to mount an immune response to this. It's just a very well-referenced article, what we know so far about the microwave oven. What do you use instead? We have a little toaster oven. It's a convection oven, and it heats food very quickly, half the time of a great big oven, and that's what we use when we want to heat something quickly.
So a friend of mine, a scientist actually, he was always saying, "Oh, Hilda, all cooking changes the composition of food. Like the microwave just does it a little faster." What would you say to that?
Yes, the microwave does it in a violent way. Now, one of the things I talk about in the cooking article was that gentle cooking, braising and so forth, or cooking that doesn't heat the center of your meat too hot, what that does is unfold or slightly open up the very tough meat proteins, because meat proteins are very tightly bound and they're hard to digest unless they're opened up a little bit. And so gentle cooking opens up these tightly wound proteins and provides a lot more docking points, so to speak, for the digestive enzymes. So that kind of heating is fine. We know that no kind of heating is fine for milk. Milk needs to be raw. And so every food has its different way that it should be prepared. But the microwave is very quick, very violent, and this is not what we should be doing. By the way, I just found an article about milk. It's Japanese investigators, and they looked at 4 ways of heating milk and what it did to the proteins in milk. And one was microwaving, and all 4 ways, it was microwaving, heating, spray drying, and even freeze drying. All 4 ways totally denatured the milk proteins, turned them into something quite toxic for the blood and the brain. And the rats fed these denatured proteins developed memory problems and what we think of as symptoms of Alzheimer's.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'm so grateful that you're constantly doing continued research into what's happening out there. I hadn't heard this before.
Well, I wanted to do the microwave article in the same issue as the cooking article, because in the cooking article, we make a case for cooking of certain foods, but in the microwave article, we make the case that the microwave is not an appropriate way of heating our foods.
Very good. So I want to wrap up this conversation, which has been amazing. I just love meat, so that's why. But I want to wrap it up with asking the question I often ask at the end. If the listener could do one thing to improve their health, and maybe based on one of these articles in the journal, what one thing should they attempt to do?
Well, if they have a microwave and they're using the microwave for a lot of their food, I would throw the microwave out. Absolutely, that would be the first thing that I would do. And then, of course, I always say the next thing is you eat lots of butter and get rid of all the industrial fats and oils. And by the way, the industrial fats and oils, this is the cooking oils, the plant-based oils in your processed food and your crackers and everything, and your chips and your potato chips, etc. These have all been heated at least 5 times and heated very hot in the processing process. So they are just not fit to eat. They're quite toxic.
So even if it says, let's say, organic sunflower oil, you're telling me it's just heated so high that it's altering the composition of the oil, making it bad for our body.
Yes, and the sunflower oil has lots and lots of omega-6. Now, you do need more omega-6 in the period of growth, and that's why we put a little bit of sunflower oil into the baby formula, because raw milk actually has quite a bit of omega-6. But you don't want to eat a lot of it, because then you're going to get too much omega-6, and that omega-6 is likely to be damaged.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I love the convo.
Thank you, Hilda. It's great to be here.
Our guest today was Fallon Morell. Check out her blog at nourishingtraditions.com and get the journal by becoming a member of the Weston A. Price Foundation on our website, westonaprice.org. You can find me on Instagram at Holistic Hilda. And for the show notes for this and every episode of the Wise Traditions podcast, go to our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And that's it. Thanks for listening, everybody, and see you next time.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.